Democrats closed your businesses, your schools, and mandated healthy people stay at home. Now that same government, almost completely controlled by Democrats, and Joe Biden wants to be your employer, your paycheck, your guardian, and your family. Sounds like a good idea if you're not into that whole freedom and independence thing. But joining me now with reaction to break it all down is my all-star panel, David Webb, Fox Nation host and SiriusXM Patriot host, Erin Elmore, Executive Director of USA Strong and Town Hall columnist, and Jason Chaffetz, Fox News contributor and author of the new book, They Never Let a Crisis Go to Waste, The Truth About Disaster Liberalism. And ain't that the truth? All right, guys. Well, it was Biden's address, 100 days in office. David Webb, I want to start with you. What are your top line thoughts about that little charade?
I've got notes, pages of notes. Hi, Tommy. Hi, everyone. And to the Fox Nation audience, it's great to be back. Look, let's just go right to it. You've got 100 days of America on fire and 99 days in. That's what Biden's talking about. Truth is, for a year, this country's been on fire. Portland, Seattle, Minneapolis, so many cities, Kenosha, Wisconsin, Brooklyn Center, what's going on in North Carolina or South Carolina right now. He talks about America's back and the world leaders, he says, ask him, but for how long? I think the American people should ask that same question. He says, no amendment to the Constitution is absolute. Well, our founding fathers thought differently, that it would be tough to change it, but Democrats have a different view. And by the way, Biden's been in D.C. for 50 years. How come he hasn't rooted out systemic racism yet? And I'll toss it back to you.
That is an excellent point, and I don't think we're ever really going to get an answer on that one, David, because we know we certainly didn't get an answer from that during the entire campaign season. But I know we have a reaction coming up from Senator Tim Scott, giving a reaction to that. That's coming up very shortly. But before we go to that, Erin, I want to ask you, a lot of talk tonight, a lot of hoorah, America is back, which is interesting to me because the Democrats usually dump on America every chance they get. But do you think the American people bought what Biden was selling them right there?
I think that we live in such a divisive time thanks to the Democrats, and I think that they have this drunkenness of believing everything that Joe Biden says. So, of course, they're going to nod in unison and just applaud aimlessly like a bunch of seals in the circus. But what I have to say about tonight is platitudes and political theater. I mean, you could barely fit all those platitudes into one speech, truthfully. And all of the political theater, how he was praising the fact that there were women behind him. Really? We're back to identity politics? Yes, it's great to have people of every race, every ethnicity, every gender represented in Washington, but doesn't it matter what our qualifications are? Clearly not anymore. Biden spoke a lot about women in the workplace, equal pay. These are untruths, to be very honest. And he also, which is really alarming, talked about women who are abused. And then all that was not caring about women. It was a means to get gun control. So be careful of what Joe Biden says, because what he says and what he's doing are two different things.
Yeah, one of my favorite parts about him talking about women and women in the workforce is that so many women had to leave the workforce, but he failed to mention that so many women had to leave the workforce during the pandemic because they had to stay home to take care of their children that were in virtual learning because of Democrat tyrants like himself and others across the country. But I'm sure we'll talk about that later. Jason, you're one of the only one of us that could have ever been in that room, and I have to ask you, if you had the opportunity back when you were in Congress, would you have listened to that wonderful joint address we just heard from our sleepy President Biden? And we lost Jason because he was just so excited about that speech, just as excited as Joe was, clearly. But David, I want to go back to you and talking about some of the big spending bills that were placed on the table. $1.8 trillion American Families Plan. What's your take? We're going to be paying for it, so I hope there's a lot of goodies in it for all of us.
For a long time, Tommy, we've been using the phrase redistribution of wealth. What we really see here is a far left realignment of the economy. Think about some things that go together. You have this K through 12 approach, and now they want to add paid schooling. They want to add free for all, but it's actually at a cost to others. They also want to add more subsidies, more programs. So really, this is a realignment of wealth, a realignment from those that produce, those that earn, that does not benefit those that are at the lower, whether they're below the poverty line or in the low-income brackets in America. Contrast that with a HUD study in August of 2020 that showed that in the last few years, with the Opportunity Zone projects, with changes in tax policy, with all the things that were done by the Trump administration, roughly 1 million Americans were lifted above the poverty line. This was already happening, just like there was a strong foundation in the economy. But what does Biden plan to do? Tax it away, tax your capital gains, raise your overall rates to probably somewhere north of 43.5%. Americans are literally going to watch their earnings be pulled away and realigned to those who don't produce. That failed. Biden's promise in America, Greece. How did Greece work out?
Well, exactly. And Erin, I want to ask you too, because Biden talked a lot about paying our fair share. And I was a little curious. I wanted to know what Biden thought his fair share of my hard-earned income was, because he sure had a lot to say about how we should all be paying up. Corporations should be paying up. Rich people should be paying up. You know, he doesn't agree that we shouldn't have billionaires, but he also thinks that they should be paying to really fund this economy and all of his large ticket programs. So what are your thoughts on how we're going to pay for all of this wonderfulness?
So Joe Biden and his Democrat cronies are the arbiters of what's fair, what's moral, what's just. It's completely up to them to decide what we need. That's not how a democracy works. That's not how America works. That's not what our founders wanted for America. Moreover, I'm no economist, okay? But I know one thing. He said, and I quote, "We want to grow the economy from the bottom." That is not possible. He really talked down to trickle-down economics, which were popular under Bush. I was a little young to remember that, but nonetheless, I do remember it. There is no way to say that we're going to infuse the bottom percentage of earners in America with cash and have them flow it upwards. I mean, these statements that he's making completely defy logic. They defy economic principle. Also, he's talking about schooling, which you touched on earlier. How dare he, as a mother, I will tell you, how dare he talk about preschool and schooling when our kids in the Northeast still haven't seen the inside of a classroom. There is still no plan to get schools open. The COVID bill, the COVID relief bill, provided no relief to working mothers such as myself. So you know what? All of this, again, platitudes, and nothing is grounded in economic reality, educational reality, or American reality.
Hey, amen to that, sister. But I want to bring in Jason because he is the author of Never Let a Crisis Go to Waste. And we know that the Democrats have certainly not left the COVID crisis go to waste. They've been using it every chance they can to send Americans checks to make the government larger. And that is exactly what Joe Biden's speech was all about tonight, was celebrating bigger government. What were your thoughts about what we just heard from our President Biden?
Well, first of all, the visual was just an embarrassment. All of those people, they have masks. And they've been vaccinated. I think that was more theater and it was an embarrassment. I think Joe Biden spent the first, I don't know what it was, 5 or 10 minutes talking about how great the vaccine rollout was. Well, that's a credit to Donald Trump. The one thing he forgot to do was mention Donald Trump because that's the reason the Operation Warp Speed and everything was happening. But you're right, Tommy, more government, more control, less liberty, and more of our American tax dollars. And don't tell me that it's just going to be the upper 1%, the mega rich, Jeff Bezos is going to pay for everything. That's not the way this is going to go down. Every single one of us. And I thought at one point Joe Biden said it was fiscally responsible, and I just kind of started laughing out loud. There's nothing financially and fiscally responsible about anything that he's doing. It's just all government all the time.
Yeah, it's always fiscally responsible to take money from hard-working American taxpayers and redistribute it. That's the Democrats' idea of being fiscally responsible. Send it to D.C. and let them reallocate it the way they think is best. But I want to talk about COVID again before we go to Senator Scott, because that is what we started the speech with. That's what's consumed the country for over a year now. You know, and again, as you said, Jason, touting the vaccine, pushing Americans to get the vaccine that Donald Trump and Operation Warp Speed gave us, and then now they're pushing it on us, but without giving credit to Donald Trump. But I want to ask you guys about that because, you know, again, as Joe Biden has done over the last several weeks and even as late as yesterday, talking about the new CDC unmasking guidelines, it seemed to me as though he was saying, hey, listen, guys, we might be able to get back to normal, but it's still your duty to wear masks even if you're fully vaccinated. It's still your duty to get the vaccine. It's still your duty not to live your normal life. David, did you have any light at the end of the tunnel that a Biden administration is finally actually going to let us live normal life?
No. Because what this is a political pandemic. I'm in Florida and I travel around this country. I continue to travel through the pandemic. I haven't caught COVID. I've been cautious and I'm still standing here or sitting here and I'm alive. Where the science has failed them because they could no longer control that, they made it politics. This farce that played out, as Jason pointed out in the example, of a fully vaccinated group of people who are contrary to CDC guidelines, at least the latest revamped guidelines, and to Fauci's contradictions, is an example of what they will do simply to achieve their goals. This really is about power for the Democrats, and power comes from being able to control you, your lives, your livelihoods, because then they can turn around and take your hard-earned tax dollars, realign it, reallocate it, and give it out in the form of subsidies or some program. What that does, that binds people. Perfect example. When you look at the $300 extra per week that's being given out for some of those that are unemployed and those that won't go back to work, that brings their earnings to around $17, $17.50, $18 an hour in some cases relative to what they do. That statistic alone tells you that people will not go back to work. I have a friend who was looking for 70 workers, got 45. I hear anecdotally from many others on my radio show, they're looking for employees. Companies are offering bonuses and they can't get workers. This is how they make basically an entitled nation.
Mm-hmm. Well, luckily, thanks to the Biden administration, we'll have plenty of illegal immigrants to fill those jobs. Not that that's going to help our country in any way, shape, or form. But Erin, I want to ask you about something, because we know as a lot of these speeches go, and certainly every time we hear from the Democrats, it's really their liberal agenda, their liberal wish list. Something that was thrown around again tonight was raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour. Again, they use the same tired line that someone should not be working a full-time job and be below the poverty line, yada, yada, yada. The same canned line they use over and over again when they're trying to push this farce. What do you think about that? Do you think the Republicans are going to get on board with that? Because I'm a little concerned that some Republicans are looking at that $15 minimum wage and saying that that might be on the bargaining table.
I'm worried as well, and I think you're absolutely right. It's a point of bargaining for them, and they say, hey, if we're at 15, and they'll meet somewhere in the middle, and I don't think that's how our economy will grow, and that's not how this is going to work to help the American people whatsoever. They're influxing illegal immigrants into our society, and that actually drives wages down. So what is it that you want, Joe Biden? Do you want higher wages or cheap illegal labor, which actually hurts the African American and underprivileged communities even more? So to your point, exactly, this is not what America needs. This is not the way to stimulate the economy. But as we know, Democrats never have a plan. All they do is spend money that they don't have. They believe it honestly grows on trees. And what they're doing is not helping the American people in any way, shape, or form. So truly, it's just more platitudes, no action, money that we don't have, and this is going to create massive inflation, and somehow the stock market's still doing well. But I'm really waiting for the other shoe to drop here, because there is no plan of action like President Trump had, because he actually worked in business. He wasn't a bureaucrat that was in Washington for 50 years. Now we're picking up the scraps and trying to find a way to make it work. And honestly, I have no idea what's going to happen, but let's pray that these Republicans stay strong, stay steadfast, and do not agree to this minimum wage at all.
Yeah, can I just make a really important point to what Erin just said, Tommy?
You got
she
like
brought
15
up wage
seconds,
suppression.
David, because they're coming up with Tim Scott right after you.
All right, wage suppression, lower income communities. How are you going to raise the economy from the bottom up? Think about that.
All right, we're heading to Senator Tim Scott with his reaction to that lovely speech. Let's take a listen.
Carolina, we just heard President Biden's first address to Congress. Our president seems like a good man. His speech was full of good words, but President Biden promised you a specific kind of leadership. He promised to unite a nation, to lower the temperature, to govern for all Americans, no matter how we voted. This was the pitch. You just heard it again. But our nation is starving for more than empty platitudes. We need policies and progress that brings us closer together. But 3 months in, the actions of the president and his party are pulling us further and further apart. I won't waste your time with finger pointing or partisan bickering. You can get that on TV anytime you want. I want to have an honest conversation about common sense and common ground, about this feeling that our nation is sliding off its shared foundation and how we move forward together. Growing up, I never dreamed I would be standing here tonight. When I was a kid, my parents divorced. My mother, my brother, and I moved in with my grandparents. 3 of us sharing one bedroom. I was disillusioned and angry, and I nearly failed out of school. But I was blessed. First, with a praying mama. And let me say this to the single mothers out there who are working their tails off, working hard, trying to make the ends meet, wondering if it's worth it, you can bet it is. God bless your amazing effort on the part of your kids. I was also blessed by a Chick-fil-A operator, John Moniz, and finally with a string of opportunities that are only possible here in America. This past year, I've watched COVID attack every rung of the ladder that helped me up. So many families have lost parents and grandparents too early. So many small businesses have gone under. Becoming a Christian transformed my life, but for months, too many churches were shut down. Most of all, I'm saddened that millions of kids have lost a year of learning when they could not afford to lose a single day. Locking vulnerable kids out of the classroom is locking adults out of their future. Our public schools should have reopened months ago. Other countries did. Private and religious schools did. Science has shown for months that schools are safe. But too often, powerful grown-ups set science aside, and kids like me were left behind. The clearest case I've seen for school choice in our lifetimes, because we know that education is the closest thing to magic in America. Last year, under Republican leadership, we passed 5 bipartisan COVID packages. Congress supported our schools, our hospitals, saved our economy, and funded Operation Warp Speed, delivering vaccines in record time. All 5 bills got 90 votes in the Senate. Common sense found common ground. In February, Republicans told President Biden we wanted to keep working together to finish this fight. But Democrats wanted to go it alone. They spent almost $2 trillion on a partisan bill that the White House bragged was the most liberal bill in American history. Only 1% went to vaccinations, no requirement to reopen schools promptly. COVID brought Congress together 5 times. This administration pushed us apart. Another issue that should unite us is infrastructure. Republicans support everything you think of when you think of infrastructure. Roads, bridges, ports, airports, waterways, high-speed broadband. We're in for all of that. But again, Democrats want a partisan wish list. They won't even build bridges to build bridges. Less than 6% of the president's plan goes to roads and bridges. It's a liberal wish list of big government waste, plus the biggest job-killing tax hikes in a generation. Experts say when all is said and done, it would lower wages of the average American worker and shrink our economy. Tonight, we also heard about a so-called family plan, even more taxing, even more spending, to put Washington even more in the middle of your life, from the cradle to college. The beauty of the American dream is that families get to define it for themselves. We should be expanding opportunities and options for all families, not throwing money at certain issues because Democrats think they know best. Infrastructure spending that shrinks our economy is not common sense. Weakening our southern borders and creating a crisis is not compassionate. The president is also abandoning principles he's held for decades. Now he says your tax dollars should fund abortions. He's laying groundwork to pack the Supreme Court. This is not common ground. Nowhere do we need common ground more desperately than in our discussions of race. I have experienced the pain of discrimination. I know what it feels like to be pulled over for no reason, to be followed around the store while I'm shopping. I remember every morning at the kitchen table, my grandfather would open the newspaper and read it, I thought. But later I realized he had never learned to read it. He just wanted to set the right example. I've also experienced a different kind of intolerance. I get called Uncle Tom and the N-word by progressives, by liberals. Just last week, a national newspaper suggested my family's poverty was actually privilege because a relative owned land generations before my time. Believe me, I know firsthand our healing is not finished. In 2015, after the shooting of Walter Scott, I wrote a bill to fund body cameras. Last year, after the deaths of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, I built an even bigger police reform proposal. But my Democratic colleagues blocked it. I extended an olive branch. I offered amendments, but Democrats used a filibuster to block the debate from even happening. My friends across the aisle seemed to want the issue more than they wanted a solution. But I'm still working. I'm hopeful that this will be different. When America comes together, we've made tremendous progress, but powerful forces want to pull us apart. 100 years ago, kids in classrooms were taught the color of their skin was their most important characteristic. And if they looked a certain way, they were inferior. Today, kids are being taught that the color of their skin defines them again. And if they look a certain way, they're an oppressor. From colleges to corporations to our culture, people are making money and gaining power by pretending we haven't made any progress at all, by doubling down on the divisions we've worked so hard to heal. You know this stuff is wrong. Hear me clearly. America is not a racist country. It's backwards to fight discrimination with different types of discrimination, and it's wrong to try to use our painful past to dishonestly shut down debates in the present. I'm an African American who has voted in the South my entire life. I take voting rights personally. Republicans support making it easier to vote and harder to cheat, and so do the voters. Big majorities of Americans support early voting, and big majorities support voter ID, including African Americans and Hispanics. Common sense makes common ground. But today, this conversation has collapsed. The state of Georgia passed a law that expands early voting, preserves no excuse mail-in voting, and despite what the president claimed, did not reduce election day hours. If you actually read this law, it's mainstream. It will be easier to vote early in Georgia than in Democrat-run New York. But the left doesn't want you to know that. They want people virtue signaling by yelling about a law they haven't even read. Fact checkers have called out the White House for misstatements. The president absurdly claims that this is worse than Jim Crow. What is going on here? I'll tell you, a Washington power grab. This misplaced outrage is supposed to justify Democrats' new sweeping bill that would take over elections for all 50 states. It would send public funds to political campaigns you disagree with and make the bipartisan Federal Elections Commission partisan. This is not about civil rights or our racial past. It's about rigging elections in the future. And no, the same filibuster that President Obama and President Biden praised when they were senators, the same filibuster that the Democrats used to kill my police reform bill last year has not suddenly become a racist relic just because the shoe is now on the other foot. Race is not a political weapon to settle every issue the way one side wants. It's far too important. This should be a joyful springtime for our nation. This administration inherited a tide that had already turned. The coronavirus is on the run. Thanks to Operation Warp Speed and the Trump administration, our country is flooded with safe and effective vaccines. Thanks to our bipartisan work last year, job openings are rebounding. So why do we feel so divided? Anxious. A nation with so much cause for hope should not feel so heavy laden. A president who promised to bring us together should not be pushing agendas that tear us apart. The American family deserves better, and we know what better looks like. Just before COVID, we had the most inclusive economy in my lifetime, the lowest unemployment rates ever recorded for African Americans, Hispanics, and Asians, and a 70-year low nearly for women. Wages were growing faster at the bottom than at the top. The bottom 25% saw their wages go up faster than the top 25%. That happened because Republicans focused on expanding opportunity for all Americans. In addition to that, we passed opportunity zones, criminal justice reform, and permanent funding for historically Black colleges and universities for the first time ever. We fought the drug epidemic, rebuilt our military, and cut taxes for working families and single moms like the one that raised me. Our best future will not come from Washington schemes or socialist dreams. It will come from you, the American people, Black, Hispanic, white, and Asian, Republican and Democrat, brave police officers in Black neighborhoods. We are not adversaries. We are family. We are all in this together, and we get to live in the greatest country on earth. The country where my grandfather in his 94 years saw his family go from cotton to Congress in one lifetime. So I am more than hopeful. I am confident that our finest hour is yet to come. Original sin is never the end of the story, not in our souls and not for our nation. The real story is always redemption. I am standing here because my mom has prayed me through some really tough times. I believe our nation has succeeded the same way because generations of Americans in their own ways have asked for grace and God has supplied it. So I will close with a word from a worship song that really helped me through this past year of COVID. The music is new, but the words draw from Scripture. May the Lord bless you and keep you, make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May his presence go before you and behind you and beside you. In your weeping and your rejoicing, he is for you. May his favor be upon our nation for 1,000 generations, and your family and your children and their children. Good night, and God bless the United States of America.
All right, Senator Scott there dropping the mic. What a contrast that was to the president's speech. First of all, he seemed to be lucid and awake, so that was the first difference that I noted. But Jason, I want to go to you. Before we go back to the Biden speech, I do want to talk about Senator Scott there and the message that he just delivered. He did it very concisely, he did it very inspirationally, and as I said, he appeared to be awake and lucid through the entire thing. What are your thoughts on what we just heard?
You know, I get the emotion that was put into that. I do. And I get some of the optics of it. But I've got to tell you, I never really was a fan of this type of response from the GOP. In many ways, this was the GOP's version of a Stacey Abrams to Trump's speech when he gave it. And I thought you said David.
Sorry.
You're good, David. You just keep going.
All right. Here's look, the emotion is understandable, as I was saying, with Tim Scott, the personal story. But we just got a litany of leftism from Joe Biden, and I heard very little in the form of a planned response to those policies from an economic standpoint, from a tax policy standpoint, from counters to the planned explosion of spending. So emotion's not enough when the average American sitting out there and people in my audience say, tell us what you plan to do, GOP. So emotion may get you for a moment, but it took till the end to really get to the economy. We didn't get a written plan in a sense of a response. And, you know, it's a great line from cotton to Congress in a lifetime, but how you got there is because of America's advancements as a nation overall. And again, with all due respect to the senator, I like him, but I wanted to hear the plan and the response to the litany on the left more than I wanted to hear the emotion and the personal story. I wanted that incorporated, but more of the plan.
Yeah, I think the challenging part is the Republicans are always criticized for not sharing enough personal stories, for being too rigid and too structured, and for not, playing into that more, which the liberals do a very good job of. But Jason, I want to ask you, I think David brought up a good point. He really didn't push back on a lot of the things that we can do to stop this liberal agenda. But do you think that there is a sense from Congress, from the Senate, from the House, especially the Republicans in both of those, that there's not much that they can do to stop it? Because it doesn't seem like the Democrats are interested in bipartisanship, and they don't seem to really need bipartisanship. So is there a sense of, hey, we're just going to lick our wounds for the next couple of years and then come back in the midterms, and this is the best we can offer, is just an emotional response?
No, I think Senator Scott gave a fabulous speech. First of all, you put the speech together before you've heard what the other guy is going to say. But Senator Scott, I thought, was rich in terms of being relatable, talking about the emotional story. But he gave solid meat on the bones in terms of what Republicans have done and what they will do moving forward, from opportunity zones and criminal justice reform and things that Donald Trump did to drive the economy forward, that we're not going to tax and spend our way to more prosperity, that we shouldn't be pulling money out of people's wallets. So Senator Scott hit the mark and hit it out of the park, I think, in showing the dramatic contrast between Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, Joe Biden, and showing a vision and a belief that it's not just hope, that he is confident that we will move forward if we institute those conservative principles. That's exactly what Senator Scott said, what he meant, and what I think will resonate with the rest of the country.
But you know what, Jason? What can they do?
But, I want to move on to back to Biden's speech too, because we have so many things we want to cover there. And before we play a snippet of him talking about his American Families Plan, Erin, I want to go to you to set this up. A lot of this, what we heard from Biden tonight, was a lot of what we heard from the Democratic debates, which was free, bigger government, bigger government. So I want to play him talking about his wonderful plan that's going to cost 1.8, and I want to get your reaction to what you thought of it. Let's take a listen to that.
That's why my American Families Plan guarantees 4 additional years of public education for every person in America, starting as early as we can. The great universities in this country have conducted studies over the last 10 years. It shows that adding 2 years of universal high-quality preschool for every 3-year-old and 4-year-old, no matter what background they come from, puts them in a position to be able to compete all the way through 12 years, and increases exponentially their prospect of graduating and going on beyond graduation. When you add 2 years of free community college on top of that, you begin to change the dynamic. We can do that. And we'll increase Pell Grants and invest in historical black colleges and universities, tribal colleges, minority-serving institutions. Second thing we need, American Families Plan will provide access to quality, affordable child care. Third, the American Families Plan will finally provide up to 12 weeks of paid leave and medical leave, family medical leave. And fourth, the American Family Plan puts directly into the pockets of millions of Americans. In March, we expanded tax credit for every child in a family, up to $3,000 per child if they're under 6 years of age. Over 6 years of age. And $3,600 for children over 6 years of age, With 2 parents, 2 kids, that's $7,200 in the pockets that are going to help take care of your family. But let's extend that child care tax credit at least through the end of 2025.
All right, so basically it was, we closed your businesses, we closed your schools, but we sent you a check, and now we're going to have free college. Let's start with that, Erin. The free college, this has been something on the Democrats' wish list for a long time. Now they're finally going for it. What are your thoughts?
Well, that's just another way to get free Democrat indoctrination now, isn't it? But I worked with Ivanka Trump on the campaign trail both times around, and a lot of the things he said about child tax credits and paid family leave are straight from her playbook. So as much as they want to chastise the Republicans for helping mothers, it sounds like Joe Biden's pretty much taking from that playbook of helping families and increasing the tax credit. But back to your college, yes, this isn't really about educating anyone. It's about putting government before the family and free indoctrination. As indicated earlier, children aren't even in schools in these blue states. He has a lot of gall to talk about educating our young children when these people haven't seen the inside of a classroom for well over a year, and there still is no plan to get them back into the classrooms. By the way, in the red state of Florida, kids went back at the end of August, early September, just to set the barometer there. This is completely unreasonable. The teachers' unions, because he spoke a lot about the unions in his speech, are the ones that are pulling all of the strings. This is no longer about our families. This is no longer about our children. It's about inserting the government in the middle of our lives, making them more important than our families because it gives them more power at the end of the day, and that's the bottom line.
David, I want to ask you about this paid family leave, because I know that there are a lot of Republicans, including Ivanka Trump, that have been very much for this, and so it is somewhat of a bipartisan issue. I am against it. I don't believe in it. I don't believe it's the government's duty and the government's place, but I'm curious to see what your thoughts are on that. Do you think the Republicans are going to jump on board with that part of the American Families Plan, David?
Yeah, there are probably some Americans, maybe a Susan Collins, a Lisa Murkowski, possibly a Mitt Romney and others that may go along with this, maybe a Ben Sass out of, kind of Republican. However, most companies already handle this within their own workforce internally fairly well in America. Are there some areas that need improvement? Yes. But that should be, let's call it a workout within the private sector and what to do. Companies cannot survive if they lose enough of a percentage of employees for 12 weeks of the year. They have to replace that employee. The work must continue. Inevitably, if the company unfortunately loses too much or fails, and given the economic environment where we are now, well, everyone loses a job. So there is a balance there, but it already is struck and exists in America. And if I could just quickly go back to what we were talking about earlier when I wanted to say something more. Republicans need to step up. They're in a position where they're in the minority in both chambers. They don't have the presidency, but yet they fail to take on the presidency, the executive, when they violate existing law and regulations. Leader McCarthy hasn't done that, and that is why my critique of Republicans is, don't tell me what you will do in 2 years. You can use the legal system like attorney generals. You can challenge the executive branch, and they haven't done it yet. There's not one Republican-led lawsuit in Congress against this administration, for example, for violating the 72-hour detention of unaccompanied minors when they have them there for 10 days. So no, I don't buy the Republicans without some form of action.
Jason, I want to ask you, because a lot of the discussion about the American Families Plan and then a lot of his speech tonight was focused on jobs, which is something that should unite all Americans, because so many Americans have been out of a job for a year now and some businesses permanently closed. But, really his premise there with that entire speech is that the government is going to create jobs. The government is going to give you a job. It's going to be a green job. It's going to be a climate conscious job. How confident are you that the government's going to be able to supply all these jobs and build America back better?
I think it was fantasy land for President Biden to suggest that by spending these trillions of dollars, he's going to create all these millions of jobs and yada, yada, yada. That is not what is going to happen. If you go back and look, we have experience with this because Barack Obama and Joe Biden tried to do this $787 billion shovel-ready project of theirs, and we ended up with Solyndra and things like that. It's just fundamentally not the proper role of government. It's the private sector that builds jobs. It's entrepreneurs and people that builds jobs, not the government. And they fundamentally don't understand that. They just believe that government is the solution to all things all the time. That's why they want more of our money, more control. I don't think you ever heard Joe Biden, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think you heard Joe Biden talk about liberty and freedom and self-reliance and making decisions and entrepreneurs. You didn't hear that at all. You heard it from Tim Scott, but you didn't hear it at all talking from Joe Biden. And the issue that I really like that Tim Scott hit, that Joe Biden just shied away from, wouldn't talk at all, is about school choice. When you give parents, there shouldn't even be a federal Department of Education, by the way, but they need school choice so parents can be in control and make those decisions for themselves. It's a huge contrast between what Tim Scott was talking about and what Joe Biden didn't talk about. And you're right, Erin. It's a lot of gall from the president to talk about schools and their importance when he won't even allow them to be open in a lot of these blue states.
And I will say, too, he had a lot of gall talking about jobs and talking about union jobs. I'm from South Dakota. I traveled to the town of Phillips, South Dakota, where those people are suffering because of the cancellation of the Keystone XL pipeline. Yeah. And they still don't have their new green jobs. You know, all these wonderful green jobs that he has promised. Jen Psaki hasn't been able to tell us where they're at. We haven't been able to discover where he's going to come up with these green new jobs. And meanwhile, people in flyover country are suffering because of his climate change agenda. And Erin, I want to go to you on that, too. You know, he didn't spend as much time on the climate change as I would have expected. However, earlier this week, obviously, and last week with Earth Day, we had a lot of this climate conundrum. The climate worshipers really came out from underneath their rocks to worship the thing that is climate change. But he talked about it a little bit, and he talked about how we need to shift to green energy. You know, what was your take? Do you think that he provided sufficient evidence that he's going to be able to create these green jobs out of nowhere?
You said a very key word there, and that's evidence. I don't think he spoke to it because he knows there is no evidence, and he can't get by without any sort of data on that regard. So he just sort of speaks in those platitudes once again to try to keep the conversation going. But like you, I'm also from flyover country, and I don't forget in Western Pennsylvania when he told people who are coal miners and steel workers that they should just learn how to code. That is so out of touch and so typical of Joe Biden, who spent his time, he alleges, in Scranton, Pennsylvania. No, that's not true. He's been in Washington for 50 years collecting money from our federal government, basically to do nothing but pander to the people and lobbyists in Washington. And this is not right. And the people that are fighting our wars and paying our taxes are suffering. These green jobs do not exist. We know these wind and solar jobs do not exist. They do not pay. And we need to stimulate America and create energy independence like we had under President Trump. But now all we have is a loss of work in many key states that we call flyover country, and so do they. But truth of the matter is, these are the parts of America that are our heartland. These are the parts of America that we rely on every single day. And Joe Biden doesn't seem to care. He just sees them as people who should vote for him and shut up and do exactly what he says. And it's completely wrong. And that's what's going on. And I hope really we see in 2 years in the midterms and in 4 years in the election again, things really start to change. We need better voting laws, but we need people to get out and vote and not vote for these people because they do not want the American worker to do what's crucial, and that's work.
Well, you brought up an important point that I want to talk about, and that is the American worker. So now we're going to shift to another topic that I am certainly fired up about, and I'm sure you guys are as well, and that is immigration. Again, he didn't spend too long on it. It was kind of buried deep within the speech. And it was really interesting to me that he had the gall to talk about immigration when his czar of immigration is seated right behind him and still has not been to the border. Amazing to me that he can even discuss this. But David, I want to go to you on this. You know, really his plan to end the illegal immigration crisis, to me at least, what I took from that was, let's just open up the borders. Then we won't have a border crisis to worry about because there will be no border. It will just be one giant free-for-all. Not that we're far from that already, but it sounded to me like he wanted to go ahead and expand upon that. What are your thoughts on our border crisis and Biden's solution to that problem?
Well, you know, it's not just a border crisis, Tommy. It's actually a humanitarian crisis. Mm-hmm. And it's not just about the unaccompanied minors, the children being brought up by people who transit these, you know, hundreds and thousands of miles. You're looking at a situation where Kamala Harris is going to give $310 million to Guatemala, which will never get to the food insecurity issue she brought up. That was a campaign-style promise. Instead of working with these governments to return to the Trump policies, the Remain in Mexico policy, to work with, where they can, some of these countries to secure their borders, their environments, to help them actually start fixing their problems. They just open the flow. Then within the United States, and I had this talk with Chad Wolf earlier today on my show, what are they doing? They're letting people out, catching releases back. There's no notices to appear. They're not doing anything. They're expanding the detention facilities. So they're actually encouraging more to come with their actions versus the quote, soft words, like the soft tense they talk about. And the media is irresponsible in this. The media who are dogged in going after the Trump administration about the quote, kids in cages, remember, built in the Biden or the Obama-Biden years, will now not even mention it. They simply stand idly by and they close their eyes, turn off their cameras, and ignore what is a humanitarian crisis which comes home to your neighborhood, America, because these illegal aliens are becoming part of a problem that's too big to fix if the Democrats have their way.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. I just came back from the border a few weeks ago in Arizona, and one of my biggest concerns, not the unaccompanied minors so much, it's the gotaways. It's those that are older that are coming into our country who we have no idea where they're coming from, why they're coming, what they're bringing with them, and that's the thing that worries me most, and beyond the unaccompanied minors that are flowing in, and the cattle call has still been issued. But Jason, I want to ask you about something, because this is what frustrates me. I think we can all say that we think there's a border crisis, that we're not for illegal immigration, that we believe we need to have a secure border, but I'm very frustrated with Republicans, and I'm very frustrated with the stance that they took in the early years of the Trump administration when they could have done something about border security, but I'm also very concerned that they're going to sign on to some sort of a amnesty, pathway to citizenship farce, and I feel like that's coming. And Jason, I think you would know best. Do you think that's on the horizon from these rhinos that claim to be about border security and enforcement?
Yeah, I do. I think it's on the horizon. I think that's been a threat. It was the 8.5 years that I was there. You got to get rid of the rewards and incentives to come here illegally. They're still here. Joe Biden tonight tried to paint it as a picture of, well, we had it all stemmed and plugged up, and then it was Donald Trump. He changed the policy, and that's why there was a surge. That was a total, complete fabrication from start to finish. Donald Trump actually was putting us on a trajectory to lock down that border and to do some innovative things that everybody said he couldn't do, but he was doing them and doing much better job at securing the border. But amnesty is not part of the solution, and I fear that the Democrats will continue to just play the emotional card and say, well, now look at all the millions of people here. We have no choice. We have no choice. I saw somebody on Twitter I thought was made a very good point. The president tonight talked about American jobs and buying American goods and buying Americans, but he didn't talk about hiring Americans to do those things. And I think that was not necessarily an accident. And I do worry about the direction that this is going, but I think it does come down to votes, votes, and votes. The Democrats want more voters, and they believe that by opening up the border, they're going to secure more votes down the line.
You know, and Tommy, they're planning for this. If I could just
David,
add this.
I want to jump in there too, because this is something, David, that's been really concerning me, and I've been saying, and I've been called a conspiracy theorist to this, because Jason, I am so glad that you said that. I do believe part of this master plan is to get as many illegal immigrants into this country as possible, as fast as they can, and then work towards amnesty and then voting rights so they can shore up elections for generations, if not eternity to come. That is my biggest fear. But David, now that you've heard my rant, you can go ahead.
Well, no, I just want to add to it. And by the way, you're not a conspiracy nut, and I'll help you prove that, Tommy. Fact is, the Democrats have already passed a couple of bills in the House. So they're passed in the House, waiting on for hopefully better majority in the Senate and weaker Republicans where they can get this through. One would give amnesty to anyone who came here as of January 1 of this year who was 19 years or younger. I can't remember the exact name of the bill, but I covered that this morning. Then you look at the other things they're doing. They're replacing populations in a sense that one of the other proposals by the Biden administration is that if you come here illegally and you work in agriculture for 10 years and you pay your taxes and all the nice things they tell you, then we can probably offer you a path to citizenship. They're literally creating a subclass of serfs in this country that they plan to use to acquire more power. You're not a conspiracy theorist.
And that is my greatest fear. And I think immigration is the way that they're going to do it. They're going to mess with voting rules and regulations, and then they're going to mess with immigration and have an open borders policy. But as much as I love talking about immigration, and I could do it all night, I want to shift to another topic tonight, and that was policing in America. Let's take a listen to what Joe Biden had to say, and then Erin, I'm coming to you for reaction.
My fellow Americans, we have to come together to rebuild trust between law enforcement and the people they serve, to root out systemic racism in our criminal justice system, and to enact police reform in George Floyd's name that passed the House already. I know Republicans have their own ideas and are engaged in very productive discussions with Democrats in the Senate. We need to work together to find a consensus. But let's get it done next month, by the first anniversary of George Floyd's death. The country supports this reform, and Congress should act. We have a giant opportunity to bend the arc of the moral universe toward justice, real justice.
Now, I'm assuming by real justice, he meant something other than looting the Foot Locker, but then again, I would certainly hope so. But Erin, I want to get your take on that. You know, I will have to say the part of that clip we didn't see is he was talking about law enforcement when he started discussing policing in America, and he, thank goodness, did say that most law enforcement was good. I didn't expect him to say that, so I will give credit where credit is due, but then he went on to basically say that there is rampant systemic racism within our policing system. What did you think about his comments there about the reforms that need to take place?
Sigh, in one word. I don't think any legislation should be in the name of a career criminal. Just one thing, I don't think we should glorify crime. I don't think people that resist arrest have bad plates on their car. I don't think people that carry illegal firearms when they're told to put down a firearm or a weapon. You know, we are glorifying people in this country that no one, of course, ever deserves to die, but we shouldn't be glorifying crime and criminals under the guise of spinning a narrative about racism here. We have to support our police, not bad ones, but we need to support our police force, or else the police aren't going to want to protect us, or people aren't going to want to become police officers. The way that I grow up, and the way that my son is growing up, is that this is law enforcement. This is a teacher. This is a parent. You have to have respect for them. And what the Democrats are basically instituting here is a policy of not respecting authority. So yes, it's perfectly acceptable to loot and riot at a Foot Locker and take what you think is yours for reparations, but this is going to create a culture and a society of people that have no respect for law and order, no respect for elders, no respect for authority of any kind, and that is not the right direction for America. So what Joe Biden is pushing here isn't the answer.
And I agree with you wholeheartedly, but Jason, I have to ask you, you know, I think that there is this culture of this war on cops, this demonization of police, this pushing of the narrative that there is this rampant systemic racism within the police force. But what is the motivation behind that? Why are the Democrats so hell-bent on advancing that narrative? It's not unifying, it's not correct, it's not helping cities and communities. Our cities are literally burning in front of our eyes, so why continue to push that? I seriously don't know. Jason, I hope you can take a swing at it.
Well, the promise and the rhetoric of Joe Biden is just a lie. It's a fabrication. It was, he pushed himself out there as somebody who could unite the nation. He would work together with Republicans. Even tonight, multiple times, he said, imagine a world, you know, I'm paraphrasing obviously, where we work together and we come to the table. Well, they've never, the White House, Joe Biden has not had a conversation with Leader McCarthy. He hasn't had a sit-down meeting with Mitch McConnell. So, you know, it's all fabrication there that goes along the way. I thought one of Tim Scott's best points was when he talked about the fact that he did have a policing bill, that he does support the blue. But there are some reforms that we could work towards, and the Democrats used every tool they could shut it down because they like the issue. They think that by dividing America, by separating us by all these different factors, that they can rally their base and get people more and more whipped up. And I got to tell you, there are police officers that were watching that, and families of police officers, equally as important, that were watching that and saw sitting just behind Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, who less than a year ago was bailing people out as fast as she could, using the power of her name and her office to raise money to bail people out so they could get back out on the street, not to peacefully assemble, not to just rally and make a statement, but to get out and get back in the fight. That's what she referred to it as, and to engage in the riots and lawlessness. That's what they see behind them, and that's why I just think the Democrats, that law and order will be a huge issue in 2022. That, in immigration, the economy, but I think the law and order in this country is just fundamentally, it's just going the wrong direction, and most Americans do not recognize or they cannot relate to what the Democrats are trying to sell.
David, I want to go to you on this too, though, because we talked about police reform, and Senator Scott brought up police reform, and there have been Republicans that have signed on to some aspects of police reform, but I don't know exactly what that looks like, and if that looks like something that we want to model our country after, because it sounds a lot like a place that I fled from, which is California, that claims to have police and criminal justice reform, but it looks a whole lot more like felon coddling. But, what's your take on it, David, and where do we go from here to bring the country together and to reach a consensus on this?
Well, first we have to be honest about what's really going on. The quote, defund police movement is a Marxist-led movement. People like Patrisse Cullors, Opal Tometi, Alicia Garza, the founders of Black Lives Matter, and others. Susan Rosenberg, who once led a communist team that bombed the capital of the United States, now an advisor to the thousand, I can't remember the actual name of the program that funds all of these Black Lives Matter or does administrative work for these Black Lives Matter movements. So see that for what it is. Now let's talk real world, because Jason said it will be a big issue. Law and order will be a big issue in 2022. What will be a big issue, Jason? I want to add one word to that. Crime and law and order. Let me give you an example from an internal memo from NYPD that was given to me. This recent class on April 21st that was supposed to go into the academy had less people than they needed, 350 only instead of 900. There is no class in the academy. Normally, recruitment, the recruiting office, comes up with 15 to 20,000 people requesting to take the exam to go into the academy. They had less than 5,000. They had over 5,000 police officers retiring, filing, and leaving the department. So their numbers continue to drop. So they're losing officers. What does that mean? Crime in New York City streets will continue to spike. This is happening all over the country. Look at Minneapolis. Look at other cities around the country. And this will be crime, and that will be a big issue, because the people on Main Street, the people in the bodegas, the people in the corner gas station, the grandmother, the child, they will all deal with the crime, and we're not putting this where it belongs, straight on the hard left. And by the way, Jason, Joe Biden's staffers were also raising money to bail those rioters out of jail.
Yeah, it was quite despicable. But I want to move on to another point that was made tonight, and a lot of time spent on it. Surprise, surprise. And that was what they call common sense gun reform. Now, they always tell us they're not coming after our guns, but, Joe Biden wanted to remind us that deer don't wear Kevlar vests, which I thought really was the moment of the night. I don't know if we have that clip. Boy, I sure wish that we did, because it was probably the most animated I've seen him in a while. But we do have it, so let's just all relive that wonderful moment together.
And I'll do everything in my power to protect the American people from this epidemic of gun violence, but it's time for Congress to act as well. Look, I don't want to become confrontational, but we need more Senate Republicans to join the overwhelming majority of Democratic colleagues and close the loopholes required in background check purchases of guns. We need a ban on assault weapons and high-capacity magazines. And don't tell me it can't be done. We did it before and it worked.
So that wasn't the part where he mentioned that deer don't wear Kevlar vests, but I know that you all probably heard it and enjoyed it as much as I do. But, that's something that I wanted to remind Joe Biden on Twitter and all the Democrats that are confused. The Second Amendment wasn't written for hunters, but the Democrats certainly seem to think that that is the case. But, Erin, I want to go to you. We know that this has been a cornerstone of the liberal agenda for some time now, and now they have the majority to be able to make it happen. But gun reform, common sense gun reform, as they say, I have a feeling it's coming fast and it's coming strong. What do you think?
They're coming for the Constitution. And when he said we've done it before in closing the loopholes, I sort of shook my head and honestly asked myself what exactly he was talking about. Because this is another one of those moments for thee, but not for me, right? It's sort of like Gavin Newsom at the French Laundry, or Nancy Pelosi getting her hair done inside when none of us were allowed, because they can have private armed security out there in Washington. They can have barbed wire around the Capitol and fences. They can have all the guns that they want, but they want to take away the average everyday American citizen's right to a gun. And that is our constitutional right as Americans. So this is the very, very scariest part, because when you start chipping away at the Constitution, you do it amendment by amendment by amendment. We already know that the First Amendment has been completely bastardized. So this is truly the next beacon of freedom. And when I talk to people that live in blue states that are riddled with crime, they say, when is this all going to change? When is this going to stop? And I tell them, when you revolt, because people will push you as far as you will let them. Yet these people still get elected. Yet they try to make this legislation. Like Joe Biden still says we want to have common sense gun reform. That's not what America needs. So we have to get out there and vote against these policies and talk to our legislators and elected officials, or else we're in real trouble as a nation.
It's very interesting that the same group of people that want to defund and abolish the police, or at least back groups that want to defund and abolish the police, also don't think that American citizens need firearms for self-defense and protection. I don't know exactly what they want us to do. I'm certainly not going to be counting on Joe Biden or Kamala Harris for my personal safety anytime soon. But Jason, I want to ask you about this, because he spent a lot of his speech there really qualifying and validating what he was talking about with gun reform by saying that it doesn't violate the Constitution. At one point, he even said that, oh, hey, you can't shout fire in a crowded theater, comparing that to the infringements upon the Second Amendment. Do you think the American people are buying that he's really keeping our constitutional rights protected and in check?
No, he's playing to his liberal base. And what I always find interesting is so many of these liberal leftist Democrats, they have never fired a gun. They don't understand how it works. They haven't gone through a background check. They don't understand all the rigors that you have to go through. And you know what? If you're a suspicionless American, if you are a law-abiding citizen, you have a constitutional right to bear arms. And he talked about, and Erin mentioned it, but he talked about how he did it before and it worked. No, they did it before and it didn't work. That's why it expired and they finally got rid of it, and it makes no sense. But they seem to conveniently omit the idea that so many of the gun deaths that happen in this country are, quite frankly, black on black violence, white on white violence. People using handguns for things, and they're not willing to actually prosecute people. Maybe they could start with Hunter Biden, because Hunter Biden seems to have filled out a form illegally to acquire a gun that his girlfriend or wife or whatever throws it in a garbage can by a school. If you want to lead and show us as an example, President Biden, that you mean what you say, then why don't you go to the smartest person you know on the planet, Hunter Biden, and figure out if he broke the law, because I think he did. Let's just enforce those laws before you want to try to put new laws on those of us that actually abide by the laws.
Jason, Hunter's busy teaching at his new job over at Tulane.
Yeah. David, I want to go to you on closing thoughts on this topic in particular. How successful do you think the Democrats are going to be in coming after our guns and our Second Amendment? Because I think that's what most Americans want to know. What is the realistic chance that we're going to see some real, what they deem common sense gun reform coming to a city near us?
Well, first of all, let me say I do believe in common sense gun control. I make sure the weapon is cleaned, ready, able to be used when I need it to defend myself or defend my family. So that's common sense gun control. Look, this is a farce, and Biden is either willfully ignorant or lying to the American people. First of all, the FBI data is clear. When it comes to murders, to Jason's point, whether it's committed black on black, white on white, communal in any form, typically 3 bullets or less are what's used. So this whole assault weapons, high capacity magazine, it's all a farce, all designed to create an image. When you look at a group like ProPublica, no fan of the right, and they put out a study that after 20 years, Dianne Feinstein, Biden and all the left have failed with their various assault weapons ban, then you have to ask yourself, what's the real goal? Again, it's about control of the population. That is simply the method to get there by restricting our rights. And by the way, Jason, I'm with you. It's time to close the boyfriend loophole when it comes to Hunter Biden. And maybe we can, talk to his girlfriend about buying a gun for him and him discarding it, which is a felony, by the way, near a school when he did that. But they're not interested in anything but using this to restrict our rights and to make the American who's law-abiding the criminal, while the criminal doesn't abide the laws and goes out and commits crimes in some form. And when the gun's not available, they'll simply use something else.
What's amazing to me is that the Democrats, out of one side of their mouth, really embolden criminals and lawlessness. And then on the other side of their mouth, they talk about control for law-abiding, decent Americans who are just trying to live and work in this country to the best of their ability and want as little government interference as possible. But that's really been the name of the game for the last 100 days of this Biden administration. It's been the least transparent administration that was promised to be the most. We've heard very little from Joe Biden himself. We heard him tonight, of course, towards the end there. It sounded, at least to me, like he was trailing off. But the message tonight, Jason, which I'm glad that you brought up, it wasn't one of freedom and liberty. It wasn't one of self-reliance or personal responsibility. It was one of depending upon the government for your health and safety, depending upon the government for your job, depending upon the government for your paycheck, and to be allowed to go outside without a mask. So at the end of the day, I think the American people are certainly going to have a choice in these midterm elections if they want to choose freedom once again and putting America first, or continue down this path of America last and control. But that's going to do it for us tonight. Fox Nation presents our joint address from President Biden. Thank you, Erin Elmore, Jason Chaffetz, David Webb. Good to see you guys. I hope that at some point we can do this again in person in New York City. But until then, God bless you guys. Good night and take care.